Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Richard Lewis Show. I'm your host, Richard Lewis, and joining me this week, it's a very special guest, someone I've been wanting to get on the show for a while. We've been flirting with each other in DMs to make this happen, but it is Siraj Hashmi. He is a journalist, and more importantly than that, the inventor of The List, which is a list of the worst tweets on a weekly basis and people who really must have their phones taken away from them. So we're going to get into it. First of all, Siraj, thanks so much for coming on the show. As I said, been wanting to get you on a long time. I think you're a real interesting cat, especially with everything that's going on in the state of journalism in America today.
I appreciate you having me on, Richard. It is long overdue that we've had this conversation, and I'm very much interested in lighting some bitches up.
Yeah, well, plenty to light up, right? Let's start with, because one of the things you should never do on a show like this is ask the guest to introduce themselves. It reeks of laziness, right? You know, you always go, tell me a bit about yourself. No, that's your job. You're meant to tell the viewers you're the host. That being said, why don't you give us a broad history? Because I went on, when I was researching this, I went on your muck rack and saw where you were at before the Examiner. And, you've been all over the place. It's not like you're particularly pigeonholed into one particular kind of like idealistic avenue of journalism. You've done lots of different things. I mean, now I think you're even been published on Glenn Greenwald's Substack as well recently, right?
That's correct. Yeah. And it's by design too, because, getting into journalism, I was originally actually a pre-med bio major coming out of college. So I graduated from Dickinson College in 2009, a liberal arts school in Pennsylvania, very much in the middle of nowhere in the Northeast of the United States. And to give you a long story short, I just was turned off to medicine. So I switched over to journalism after I turned 25 in 2012. I originally started with the sports broadcasting route. About a year and a half into it, I switched over to politics just because sports got really redundant very quickly. And politics, I always had a familiarity with it, and I always found it to be challenging and something that I always would be learning something new about pretty much every single news cycle. And that definitely has not failed in terms of me challenging myself to learn about more of our history, our society, how governance works, how government works, and how it doesn't work. And over the course of those last, I'd say, 7 to 8 years in which I've been involved in journalism, I have discovered a lot about myself, but a lot about the industry as a whole. And to be honest, when I say that I haven't been pigeonholed by design, is because when I got into the scene, I was born and raised Muslim, still practice, even though I'm not like the best Muslim. blame the Michelob for that. Anyways, what I was going to say was that all the Muslims who were on TV, this is around the time that ISIS was coming onto the scene. And all the Muslims who are on TV or, writing or, getting published, they were all talking about terrorism and radical Islamic terrorism. And that's just something I didn't want to be swept into, because as soon as the terrorism angle starts to fade, these people basically become irrelevant. And once you center all of your work, your professional career around your identity, then single thing that you comment on is in relation to that identity. And people, honestly, your audience gets tired of it. So I rather honestly just comment on politics at large and just be a journalist who just so happens to be Muslim. And when I have to comment on that stuff, I can, but it's not my entire, it's not my central ethos in terms of how I approach my career.
And there was a real clamor as well, because I was writing about American politics at the time 9/11 occurred, right? So I've seen the shift. I mean, I'm very hyperbolic for all I criticize hyperbole in the media today. I believe if you want to talk about the closest America's had in terms of potential to a fascist president, It's George W. If you want to talk about somebody that I believe has been the most destructive force in American politics, it's George W. And I saw that reaction. And as you say, interestingly enough, this weird clamor to find, journalistically literate Muslims, to bring them into the space to essentially, in this like really reductive way, almost apologize for what happened. And I fucking despised that, because it's like, some asshole, I'll never have to apologize for something some fat white British guy did at a football game. No one's going to go, oh, Richard, you've been to soccer matches, right? Well, that hooligan over there, he punched a horse. What have you got to say about it? And I mean, well, not much, mate. Well, give my regards to the horse, I suppose. So it was this ridiculous push in the media to get Muslims in that, especially, on Fox. And, that was a big thing.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that, and this is how I probably differ from not only just a lot of my friends, but also my own family, because my family, and again, I agree with you about George W. Bush. In my lifetime, there's never been a more destructive president to the United States, the country I love, that I was born in, than George W. Bush. He is the reason why I got involved in any level of politics, whether it be activism, protesting. And the only protest I have ever been to and have ever participated in which I like designed signs for, was protesting against the Iraq War. Like, that is the only thing that I've done. And since then, I haven't done anything since. I hate the label of, I hate this. I'm not an activist. I hate the label. I think it is, I think it's somewhat dismissive of what I do. I think the most important thing for me has always been the truth. And I think you probably would agree with that as well, Richard, absolutely. That whether it hurts yourself, hurts people that you agree with, the truth is what matters the most in the end. And when it comes to a lot of things that have happened over the last 20, 30 years, you're looking at with the state of journalism, there has been sort of this entire, when Trump came into office, the entire label of fascism started to become mainstream.
Oh yeah.
And they started calling Trump a fascist. And there was never a single time in which people looked at how the establishment operates, both Democrat and Republican, because if you ever work in Washington, and I have lived in Washington for 10 plus years, they are establishment Republicans and Democrats are literally two sides of the same coin. They only care about power.
Of course.
And after they're done debating on the House or Senate floor and calling each other names, they're out there going getting drinks. Like, I have had so many off the record conversations with lawmakers telling me like the craziest friendships that they have, because if word were to ever get out that they are friends with said person, it would completely undermine everything they've ever fought for in the public scene. Like, that's the level of like how incestuous Washington DC is.
Yeah, and when I've tried to describe my kind of views on the American political system, I pretty much describe it like this: you have two criminal elements, two criminal gangs that just cloak their criminality with the guise of intentions. So over there, the blue criminals, they say, well, we're doing it for equality and progression in society and to help marginalized groups. And then once the TV cameras are off, they go into the back room and they do all the cronyism and they sign all the deals and they line their own pockets and feather their own nests and do everything for their friends. And over on the other side, you've got the red criminals who say, well, we have to do what we want to do to preserve the American dream and the American way of life and the ability for all Americans to be, upwardly mobile and to have whatever they want as much as their talent and work ethic will allow. And then the cameras go off and they go into a room and they do all of the crony deals and sign it all away. And sometimes even cross-party, they get in cahoots with each other. And like you say, a lot of backslapping and cigar chomping.
and the whole idea of fascism is all about the sort of sort of like subtle but very well established connection between public and private sector. So what we're seeing today, even between like what's happening between the government and say things like big tech or big business, a lot of the things that happen, a lot of the decisions that policymakers and lawmakers make has a lot to do with, are they serving the best interests of big tech? Are they serving the best interests of big business? And I've come to realize, I've actually, over the last few months, especially since I left the Washington Examiner, I've had sort of this awakening in which I realize not only is corporate media obviously a sort of like an extension, a wing, an arm of the Democratic Party, it's an extension of just the establishment as a whole.
Yeah.
And so everything, and I guess it took me a little bit of time to realize that, as much as I didn't want to realize it, Republicans hate Trump just as much as Democrats.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because everything is about power. Trump took over the party in 2016. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Just like Obama took over the Democratic Party in 2008. It was supposed to be Hillary's nomination. She was basically guaranteed to win the nomination in 2008. And then here comes Barack Obama basically taking it over. And so the longest struggle that's been happening, at least over the course of the last 20 years, it's not between like Republican and Democrat. I'd say right now, the biggest battle is between the Obamas and Clintons. And it's who has control over the future with respect to within the federal government. The reason why Trump was so unsuccessful in so many ways is because he can never get his people in there. And the reason for that is because Obama's people within the federal bureaucracy, I'm talking about Department of Justice, Treasury, Defense, the intelligence agencies, you name it, it was entirely well stocked with a roster of Obama ideologues and Obama acolytes who specifically were there to try to stave off Trump sort of taking over any of these federal government agencies.
And yeah, I mean, you know, I covered this as well because I think people, you know, the worst position to be in for somebody like me is to be in the unenviable position of having to defend somebody like Donald Trump. You know, I find him a boorish moron. He is the walking billboard for why people don't like New Yorkers. It seems to be someone that doesn't seem to be particularly informed, and also is a guy that's kind of failed upward due to inherited wealth. Not my type of candidate, but equally when you see, you know, what the establishment media did to Bernie, you know, when you've got Joy Reid bringing on a fucking body language expert, right, to basically play into anti-Semitic tropes, and say, oh, he's all crotchety and got a mean face, so I wouldn't trust him around women. I mean, for anyone who thinks I'm exaggerating, that was a very real news segment that aired on MSNBC, by the way. Yeah. You know, they destroyed Bernie's reputation as well. I mean, you know, and they colluded with Elizabeth Warren to do it with that nonsense that he said he didn't think a woman could be president at a dinner party, something that people at that dinner party refuted. But of course, that didn't get reported to the same degree as the alleged insult, which, by the way, wouldn't have been a sexist statement, would have been a damning indictment on modern America. So right, it's very interesting that when you see these non-establishment candidates that want to tear up the rule book, suddenly these guys, whether it's left or right, whether it's socialist or capitalist, these people are relentlessly attacked by corporate media, and 100%. That should be abundantly clear to anyone that follows what's going on. But I think a lot of people don't pick up on it.
Yeah, and it drives me nuts when people just cannot see what's in front of their faces. Once you see something, you can't unsee it. Yeah, and you know, I've had sort of that awakening that's happened over the last few months has happened really because I've understood what has taken place between sort of the idea of what America should be. And it's not really a struggle anymore about people with competing philosophies. It's really a struggle between centralization and decentralization.
Yeah.
And basically the establishment, which has basically been taken over by leftists, are pushing to centralize everything. You know, they're talking about centralizing elections, probably to try to make it so that states can't make their own decisions. So they can't. So every time you see like an election integrity bill come up to the floor, they're calling it voter suppression. They're calling it racist. They're saying they're
a return to people, Jim Crow.
The Jim Crow 2.0. They don't make this. In fact, it's just so, and they've been called out on their bullshit so many times that you even have Stacey Abrams, the governor of Georgia, I should say, has basically come out and tried to walk back a lot of the statements that she's made with respect to saying that it's not racist for them to basically be against this law, because the idea that the initial attack that they were making was that this bill is racist because it is asking people to show their ID to prove who they are to vote, and somehow asking people from minority communities, Black and brown communities, Hispanic, you name it, is racist because they don't know how to find a DMV, a Department of Motor Vehicles, to get a driver's license or a photo ID. Like, that's inherently racist to assume that.
It's so crazy as the European.
People who are
talk to people over here, brother. You know, it blows our mind that the idea of having to show an ID to do anything, for that to be held up as an example of race, it's really weird. And you know, Americans, I don't think they realize how some of the, let's say, what they take as conventional wisdoms, they, once you get across the Atlantic, they don't play out at all. They don't make any sense to anyone over here. We just look with bewilderment, like, what the fuck are they talking about? You know?
Yeah, but I think one of the things that I mean, Major League Baseball, one of the 4 major professional sports, pulled their all-star game out of Georgia because of this bill, and all of it was based on a lie. And you have to look at it and be like, what is going on? Like, the people are losing their minds. They are caving over the smallest, pettiest things that, if they had literally taken a moment to just read what's in the bill, they would realize there's no issue at all. Like, it is not about, like, this is why people are so just, I want to use the term black pill, because they're just disillusioned by everything. But when you see what's constantly happening, this is that level of fascism right there between the MLB and like the Georgia State Assembly or whatever Democratic Party within Georgia. It's just, it speaks to a level of brainwashing that we've never seen before. You know, people talk about how, like, during the Trump era, this was basically, you know, they were invoking George Orwell's 1984 literally every single week. Yet they didn't realize they have already been brainwashed by the establishment and corporate media to believe a certain narrative about everything. And almost virtually every single narrative, specifically about Trump, fell flat on his face, because the same stuff, the same issues that people were upset about with respect to Trump, say, for example, like in 2018, you had the family separation issue at the border. Guess what? It's only gotten worse under Biden.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think,
and they're also bringing, you know, they have these travel restrictions because of COVID. A bunch of these undocumented immigrants coming in through the southern border, not even getting tested for COVID, but a lot of them later getting tested positive for COVID. They're not getting vaccines. Are you kidding me? Like, this is a joke.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It's the lack of consistency. You know, look, so this will segue nicely into the next broad topic I want to talk about, and that is that there's this lack of like, to be a political ideologue, to be someone that is comfortable wearing the label left or right. And I know we've talked a lot about lefty stuff. It does go both ways. I mean, you know, obviously I was brought up in an era where the brainwashed people in America were the people that sort of took Fox News and agreed upon, kind of counterbalance to actually be Republican propaganda. Makes no bones about it. That was why it was formed historically. I was brought up in an era where the people that would parrot Fox News talking points were the very clearly brainwashed people, because very often, Fox News's accuracy record was pretty poor back in the day. I mean, it's frightening now to think there are news networks worse than Fox in America that people believe are the gospel, giving them the truth. But to kind of adopt the ideas that you have to adopt, I think, to kind of be a mainstream. And I don't even like the word leftist in a way. It is just basically it's a specific type of leftist. It's a DNC state approved leftist. You have to live in a permanent state of cognitive dissonance because if you go back 3 months, Trump did the same thing as what's being done now with very different coverage. It's always the way. And it's like this entire system is perpetuated to basically keep you having a short memory, and social media is the new aspect. Before, I think television, people were moving away from it. People weren't watching 24-hour news quite as much. I think the brainwashing capabilities of mainstream media were hugely hampered just by natural societal trends and the emergence of the internet. Social media brought it back and then made it worse than it ever has been before. And this is how you get to the situation where Donald Trump says, yeah, there's a virus coming out of China. Let's do a travel ban on China. Everyone says racist, xenophobic. I sent Stephen Miller's signature on this bill. White supremacy. You're encouraging Asian hate. All of the nonsense that came forth from what is a perfectly sensible policy. And then Joe Biden, when the rise of the Delta variant happens, he bans people traveling from India. You will also notice the average Indian, not a white person either. And nobody has said white supremacy, racism, what have you got against Asians? What have you got against Indians? Stop the hate, bro. I haven't found one piece of media in America that has called into question Joe Biden's travel ban, or even the fact that he's upheld Trump's travel bans from Europe. So you have this outrageous hypocrisy that you don't even have to go that far back to see it, and yet they can't see it. And if you present it to them, they will reel off a bunch of reasons that make no sense as to why it's different. It's crazy.
It's almost designed to make it's gaslighting in the purest sense. Gaslighting in the purest sense. It's designed to make us all go insane because we can see the truth for what it is, and yet the people who are, the mouthpieces of the establishment, of the corporate media, they will tell a certain narrative and they will have the masses of sheep right behind them. And that's what I've seen. And I mean, honestly, I don't like to make everything about myself, but at least when it comes to seeing, once you step back behind the curtain, you see all the other people who have also stepped back behind the curtain.
Yeah. And
you can see why so many people are going into independent media, because they're simply just tired of this shit. And I've been, in addition to your podcast, I've been on a few other podcasts where, talking about these sort of things has become taboo because you're immediately labeled a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, almost every single,
or worse, a Trump supporter.
Or a Trump supporter, but even that label is not so bad. I mean, it's just the fact that you get labeled a conspiracy theorist early on if you come up with these very astute observations based on the facts and evidence that have been presented, and then later turns out to be true, and you turn out to be a prophet of some sort. Just like with the when it came to, say, the Delta variant, they changed the name to Delta variant because they didn't want to call it the Indian coronavirus, because they didn't want to be they want to be labeled as racist or anti-Asian or anti-Indian at the very least. But specifically about the idea of, I think Jon Stewart, who definitely has done his fair share of spreading misinformation and sometimes disinformation over the course of his time at the Daily Show, despite it being a comedic show. I think he definitely did a lot of, he did himself a huge favor in going on Stephen Colbert's Late Show and giving a lot of credence and oxygen to the lab leak theory about the origins of the coronavirus. Now, people actually did
he was called alt-right conspiracy
I know,
theorist,
and
all
that's
of that
crazy.
stuff. Yeah,
and people didn't want to embrace that. In fact, there are a lot of people who are like Jon Stewart fans, like, oh man, now I can't be a Jon Stewart fan anymore. Like, sure you can. Like, this is actually probably the most astute observation and smartest thing he said in the last decade, at least. Because the way he said it, and making the analogy about how if there is a chocolate outbreak in Hershey, Pennsylvania, you're not going to look at like a pangolin or a bat soup in a wet market. You're going to look at the Hershey chocolate factory in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So it's, when it comes to this Wuhan Institute of Virology and them studying coronavirus, which had been obtained from a mine in 2012 that had gotten 6 to 12 other people, about at least a dozen people sick and some of them dying, and it being 95% identical to this current outbreak, 95% identical to the 2012 coronavirus. I mean, the evidence is right there, and people are fooling themselves to not at least embrace it.
Yeah, regardless of the findings,
tell the truth.
At least have the option to explore it, right? That's the bigger problem. It's not about even whether or not it is leaked from a lab. Maybe it isn't, you know? I've seen scientific papers that suggest it can't be from a lab because it doesn't have the markers of any like injection sites. So it hasn't been altered or messed with by human hands. I've seen people that say the inverse of that to be true, and people disagree. And I'm not equipped mentally to sort of break that down because I don't understand the science to the same degree as an expert in that particular field. That being said, I have said this many times. I mean, I think just on the balance of probability, the idea that this outbreak from bats of this type of virus happening in the same city as a laboratory designed to investigate, explore, and develop those types of viruses from bats. A facility that had, I think it was in 2012, 2013, people raised security concerns and health and safety concerns about that's documented. I think on the balance of all probability, it's probably something we should be looking at. And what worries me is that you're not even able to say that. Even saying that gives me a sense of trepidation because there's a media element that doesn't want to get to the bottom of things right now. It wants to be the force through which the narrative is told, not the force that sifts through the narrative to let you know the truth. And that's a huge worrying shift in general, just in journalism, that they want to be the arbiters of the narrative, not the people that break down the narrative.
Yeah. By the way, I'm just seeing that Andrew Cuomo just resigned.
Yeah, I know. What a gem to get when we get off air.
I know.
All the memes.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah. Who knew? But look, just before we get into it, because I don't, this has been we've front loaded the podcast with the heavy stuff. Let's talk about social media, because I did allude to, I think if you didn't have the omnipresent kind of news feed now, 24-hour news TV stations were one thing, but you could still turn them off and walk away from your TV. Once Absolutely. The 24-hour news is in your hand all the time because it's on your phone, and you've signed up to a number of social media sites that are deliberately designed almost in the same way as, slot machines, to keep you playing, keep you looking, keep you checking, to give you dopamine hits for when tweets bang or blow up or go viral. People can't escape the oppressive presence of the people that want to push a narrative, and there's an additional pressure to be seen as a good person, so I go along with the narrative. And so it's a type of control the media didn't have before, but it's also a type of control people are willingly buying into, because we all want to be publicly seen by as many people as possible to be a good person. It's a natural human instinct.
Absolutely. Just as you were asking me that question, I was looking for a specific meme to go for a side-by-side with that Andrew Cuomo announcement.
Mm-hmm.
And the one I went with is the image of a young Asian schoolgirl saying the evil is defeated.
Good. Very good.
So if your comment about the dopamine hit is not more accurate, I don't know what is. Yeah, obviously there is obviously that desire within everyone to want to be well liked and respected, and some people have embraced the label of being like a villain, but it definitely takes a level of like confidence and secure, self-assuredness to really want to lean into that label. And I think a few people have done it well. With respect to the list, and this is something that honestly, I've told a few people about this, about how it all started. And the reason why it came about was in December 2019. George Conway was dunking on his wife, Kellyanne Conway. Yep. And Kellyanne, who was then a White House senior advisor in the Trump administration, was commenting on the sort of this whole Trump whistleblower impeachment affair, and how Joe Biden needed Ukraine's help in order to beat Donald Trump. And her comment specifically was like, we need Ukraine's help to defeat this guy. And then George Conway tried dunking on his wife by saying, your boss apparently thought so. In which I said to myself, dunking on your wife on social media, there's no way that is, kosher. We gotta
the Conways is like a really sad example of like what American politics does to a family.
This is when they're reaching sort of a precipice, because over the course of the next year, that's when everything started to blow up, especially involving their daughter, their teenage daughter on TikTok. And when I go back and think about it, he is the original reason why the list existed. But I realized that, I started doing it as a joke. It started as sort of an everyday thing. And then when the lockdown started in March, everybody was flooding Twitter, and they were all airing their bad opinions all at once. And I had to remove myself from doing it every day because it was killing me. I had a full-time job in addition to doing this, which I wasn't really making any money on. Now it's like one of those things where it's become like a canon part of Twitter, where people are using the writing hand emojis and telling, tagging me in the tweet that's really bad. They're sending it to me. And, I've made it somewhat of a business model. It's been a lot of fun doing it. And, but yeah, it's for some people, they feel it's like a public service. And obviously it's a high praise and high honor, but it does wear on you how, you would think that, Trump has broken so many people's brains, specifically on the left, because they just can't think rationally. But it really just exposed how they never really thought rationally. And Trump just basically, lifted up the rock and just exposed them for what they were. And I thought that would go away in this year, but it actually has gotten worse. I'm not going to lie to you. People have actually gotten more insane, and it's people on the left for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I do see, as I said, I do see it going both ways. I think you will is equally find people who are conservative, that have these insane takes about, this group is going to destroy America, and the red menace is still there. You can't even acknowledge that maybe some socialist policies would help enhance American society. You can't say that over at that neck of the woods. But I do agree, when it comes to the common or garden insanity, they do tend to be, like, I follow that Libs of TikTok account that Joe Rogan.
That's great. That's a great one.
Yeah, and you just are like, holy shit, these people are fucked. They're crazy. And then when it comes to, oh my God, but there's like journalists unironically retweeting that and saying, oh, this is great. And it's like, holy shit. Like, so yeah, I mean, look, the list is, when I first encountered it, I'll be honest with you, I'd never really thought too much about just how many people were out there spewing their bile and garbage into the public sphere. I never really thought about it. I started covering politics on my podcast back in like 2015 as we went into the 2016 election. And there was so many like hilarious figures to cover. You had Kurt Eichenwald, you had what's that other fucking lunatic? The baseball guy.
You know how little that nails it down.
I was going to say that's not helpful. The baseball guy who just called Trump a motherfucking traitor over and over again. The name will come to me, but you know what I mean. And yeah, and when I saw your list, because it was kind of getting into regular circulation at this point, and I kept seeing these like little, pen emojis. I was like, holy shit, this guy is chronicling every terrible opinion and every moment of lunacy on this platform. And that was where I was like, my God, there's so much of it. Like it was frightening to me. It was like a window into almost like a mass hysteria. It was like, these are prominent figures that should be capable of rational thought. Look at the things they're saying.
And what makes it worse is the fact that these people have massive platforms.
Oh yeah,
and they have people that agree with them. I mean, I can't tell you how many takes I've seen in which they are batshit insane, and people are like, "Yes, go on, slay queen," or like, "Go off, king." Like that's like there's something deeply wrong with a lot of people on Twitter and social media in general, and look, Twitter is not real life. Social media is not real life, but
sure,
it is sort of a microcosm for how people view politics at large, because if they think this online, imagine what they're not sharing online. There are a lot of keyboard warriors, a lot of trolls, but there are a lot of like people who put themselves out there in the public space and try to make a career out of whether it be social media or on TV, journalism, you name it. And their opinions are legitimately terrible, and they have no shame in sharing said terrible opinions.
Why is it Twitter is such a uniquely bad platform for this, though? Because listen, I hate all the social media platforms. They all seem to be, it's almost like the 7 deadly sins were kind of like given tech outlets. You've got the vanity of something like an Instagram. I don't know, someone's doing a mukbang that'll cover gluttony probably on YouTube, but it's like with Twitter, there is something about it that when people sit down, like something happens in the world, and if you have a Twitter account, and in particular a blue check mark, it's like there's this clamor to spit out a take. Like you have to give an opinion about it. And when I say a take, a take to me is like, it's the difference between shit and what they call anthropologically shite. Shite is the pre-shit in your intestines, right? Before it leaves your asshole, right? So shite isn't even a shit. And shits are bad and shite's worse. And a take is an opinion that hasn't even been fully thought about. It's like, it's the kernel of what would be an informed opinion, but you never let it get past that. You will bought it, put it on Twitter for the whole world to see. And so that's what I mean when I say a take. I think people use the word opinion and take interchangeably. I don't think that's accurate. But anyway, people spit these takes out, And it's like, what are you in a hurry? Why do you have to be there to give your opinion about this thing? Half the time, not even in your wheelhouse. It's got nothing to do with your job, doesn't affect you in your daily life. And yet here you are talking about it because you feel compelled to tell people in the public sphere what you think about this thing. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I've never seen a platform promote delusions and mental illness, and I mean that genuinely, more than Twitter. I've never. It's like a platform unto itself in that regard.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, it's short form social media. It is, if people had to write an article for every single opinion they have, there would be no content online. But because Twitter is one of those things where, like, you can put out a take that may not be the most nuanced, it might be the most short form within 280 characters or however many characters you're allowed. And the fact that you can now thread tweets has made it nearly insufferable.
Yeah.
Like you know, like my attention span is not large enough to even comprehend the good threads. And that's sad, because there is content that I'm missing that actually might inform my worldview a little bit better. And I'm missing it because I'm too busy chronicling every single bad take that exists on Twitter. So I have to say that when it comes to, you know, the reason why people flood to it, and I think honestly, Donald Trump did a lot in helping the platform perform much better than what it should have done. And I think he has been one of those people that you look at, and he has such a interesting way of carrying out social media. You know, if he was never elected president, I doubt we would look at anything relating to Twitter and people within the establishment thinking that it's like the most toxic place to be on the internet. I think the only reason people look at it right now is simply because Donald Trump was president. But he was a very good shit poster.
Probably, that was what I was
probably one of the best on Twitter. The fact that he would create entire news cycles over tweets, just absolutely amazing. Like you cannot buy that level of publicity.
Which also feeds into journalistic laziness, though. And one of the things I hate is the idea that tweets are news, and if you go on to Twitter and you find 3 people, even if they're like troll accounts or bot accounts or accounts that have 2 followers, and you can find 3 people tweeting the same thing, you then go away and report on it like it's a trend that I should know about. You know, I despise what Twitter has done to journalism actually as well.
Yeah, but you know, I think that's a sort of a symptom of sort of exposing. Actually, I think Twitter has done has done us a great service in exposing journalists for who they are. Because, you know, imagine if Twitter had existed throughout the course of, you know, the modern era of journalism, and exposing people for their own internal political biases, and we probably would have had this awakening a lot sooner. I think Twitter has done a great job of. It's just like this whole this in the last decade, this whole wave of sort of these police shootings of unarmed individuals, namely Black and brown people. It's not that it wasn't happening before. It's just that the level that we have, it's just that the spotlight has been shown on it. So, for example, people have what's like the most innovative thing that has come out that everyone has possession: a cell phone with a camera that can video record basically anything within a few seconds, and you can basically show every single different angle because everybody has a cell phone. And that has basically revolutionized how a lot of stories get told. When it comes to social media and Twitter, it has exposed a lot of journalists for who they are. And whether they are aware of it, I feel like a lot of journalists just don't have the level of self-awareness to believe that, you know, their opinions might cause certain people to distrust what they report on because they have a specific agenda. And when it comes to people, thinking that, oh, I'm off the clock, I could tweet whatever I want. Like, no, you're a journalist. You're basically never off the clock.
Yeah.
And everything you say, just like with Miranda rights, can and will be used against you in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, and I think as well, look, and I've talked about this a lot. One of the huge changes has been, like, back when I was training to be a journalist and studying it and doing all of that, and I was like you, I hopped across from something else. I was a philosophy student and very quickly realized two things: that one, all philosophy students are dickheads, and two, the job potential of philosophy is philosophy lecturer. So I bailed on that. And back then, when I was getting all the formal training, the things that they would tell you would be, obviously, there's a particular set of skills that you need to have. And, when citizens try and chronicle things and try and do their journalism without an understanding of these safeguards, without an understanding of these methods, without an understanding of the ethical vows, you kind of swore to uphold as a member of the Fourth Estate, bad journalism occurs. And that's why, 20 years ago, the idea of citizen journalism was nonsense. But as we've gone through the rise of availability of technology, the rise of social media, and the fact that so many journalists get so many things wrong, they're no longer in a position to gatekeep and say only us trained, individuals can do the journalisms. You guys can't, because what we're finding is, if it wasn't for a guy with a fucking cell phone in the right place at the right time, a journalistic lie would never have been exposed, or a story would never have broke. And unfortunately, you've got the rise of the citizen journalist coinciding with the decline of the American journalist. And what that's led to is an unbelievably difficult landscape to navigate if you're actually a truth seeker and somebody that wants to be informed.
Yeah, I mean, it is very hard, and I'm hanging on to those words about, like, citizen journalists, and, like, yeah, a decade ago we would have laughed in their faces and thought, oh, you're not part of the cool kids club, get out of here. Like, that's the kind of mentality that,
oh sure, yeah,
I think journalists as a whole have taken, because if you never wrote for a major publication, like, who do you think you are, right? And in fact, I see the value in why people actually now are going towards independent media, because, every single thing that is covered within corporate media is not always, well, not every single thing, but virtually everything has been either assigned by an editor, has been approved by an editor, and you are going through levels of red tape in which relationships are basically built on, say, for example, like, I'll give you an idea. Washington Examiner. I put Ted Cruz on the list.
Yeah.
For a very bad tweet.
Which he again, he's a great example of a guy that will make bad tweets over on the right.
Yeah, on occasion, he makes a bad tweet here and there.
Yeah.
I got a call from one of the editors at the Examiner, and they were telling me to not put him on the list.
Wow.
Specifically because one of our other journalists had just done an interview with them,
right?
And his people were hounding that editor to not be critiqued by our publication. And I'm thinking to myself, well, are we in this business to hold those in power accountable, or are we in this business to just simply cozy up to the powerful and try to get that exclusive interview, try to get that access? Like, that's not why journalists should be journalists. Like, if you're interested in providing PR for a politician, go work for that politician's office, go work for that campaign. Don't get out of journalism. Yeah,
there's more money in PR as well.
Yeah, probably.
No, for sure. I've done a bit of both. You make way more money, if you can go to a company or in this case, a political outlet, and basically say, like, I can get you in front of this and get you this, like it'll cost you this. People go, yeah, there's the fucking check. I'm not getting 30,000 out of your marketing budget up front to write the fucking 2 articles I might do about you. I barely break in even on that probably. So, way more money in PR. But I think I think that's another aspect. This idea of the path. So if you're a journalist, you come in, you start writing about something you don't really want to write about, and the gold standard is politics. That's what everyone's interested in. It's what everyone wants to write about in America. It's considered if you haven't written about politics, were you even really a journalist? And then people go there, and then you're in that heady, intoxicating world of DC that where you're having cocktail parties with very powerful people. You're performing access journalism. And then you start thinking to yourself, right, well, I'll write a book. So now you sit down, you write a book, and everyone goes, oh, yes, excellent. It's all bullshit, like Jim Acosta's, enemy of the people, like the most hilarious fucking self-aggrandizing book about journalism ever written. But then it's like, well, maybe I could be a TV anchor. And now you're working for one of the major networks. And now not only are you in that heady, intoxicating world, now suddenly people are hitting you up for your opinion, your thoughts. Can I get some airtime? Can I get on your show? You're going into pitch meetings about what you want to cover. And then after that, where do you go? Well, maybe you do go into politics. Maybe you get called up to the big leagues, or maybe you go to one of the subsidiaries of this machine, big tech, or, you go work at Facebook and help them define an algorithm that, keeps and, helps the narrative stay on the rails or whatever. And so people stop somewhere along that journey. People stop thinking about why they were there in the first place, which was to go to Washington and write the type of stories that no one else was writing. That's always the journalistic aspiration. But that machine is so corrupting that I don't think many people in America have the will to resist it.
Yeah, it honestly, a lot of people lose themselves in Washington, D.C. And just this, these last few months, I actually had to get out of there because it was almost too intoxicating. And it's sad how, polarized people are outside the beltway of Washington, D.C., where everyone sort of within Washington, D.C. is like, it's just an incestuous cesspool at this point. And it's not really about, ideological differences. It's always been about power. And I think most people fail to realize that, when it comes to covering things the way they are, almost always you have to look at sort of why things are being covered versus, like the timing of everything. So say, for example, this whole Andrew Cuomo business. Mm-hmm. There's reason to believe that, or good reason to believe that maybe Andrew Cuomo wasn't sort of taken out by people on the right, like Republicans. Rather, he was sabotaged by his own party because maybe he got a little bit too ambitious and thought that, maybe I could be president someday, because he was getting that level of, he was getting a lot of good publicity. I mean, just in the last year, when the Democratic primary was still ongoing, there were tons of articles written about how Andrew Cuomo should be the Democratic nominee.
Oh yeah,
and I think there was a specific undercutting of Cuomo, and he was a bad governor. Don't get me wrong; like everything that he did with the nursing homes in the midst of COVID, while he was getting,
I said when that happened,
while he was getting
be
Emmy
the biggest
awards,
political scandal of all time.
I am amazed that this is what caused him to resign, and not the nursing
and not
scandal.
That exactly.
I mean, at least, good riddance regardless, but still, the fact that he was never held accountable for that, and the fact that the Biden DOJ refused to investigate it is appalling and abhorrent. And the fact that they never did that is a stain on our justice system as a whole. I mean, there have been a lot of big stains on our justice system over the last decade and beyond, of course. But at least in 2021, that is by far one of the worst things I've seen. And so when it comes to, the way that, some of these corporate media journalists cover things, it's usually by design. For some way, shape, or form, there's usually an agenda to be served or a narrative to be fulfilled. And, the sheep got to get fed somehow, right?
Yeah, and I think with the Cuomo thing, you can see in the coverage, it was he's our brave leader, all the covering fire over the nursing home scandal, some ridiculous shit like the whole Cuomo sexual thing. If people want to go,
yes. Shout out to Randy Rainbow for making that.
Yeah, right. But this idea that he was a great leader, a great strong leader in a difficult time, and yeah, you're right. I think people were earmarking him. Well, the public and some of these journalists were earmarking him for power. Unfortunately, he had all these other proclivities that we're starting to learn about now. But even then, people in the Democratic Party were still cagey. They hadn't committed one way or the other as to whether they were going to dogpile Cuomo. And I think the thing I despise most of all is this sense that, well, I mean, apart from you can get away with it if you play for the right team, but then what they do is they cynically wait, and just as public opinion tips to where someone is unsalvageable, unsavable, that's when they come out and start the moralizing and the sermonizing. And we were all about the right thing all along, guys. Cuomo's position's completely untenable. It's been untenable for a fucking year, by the way. Why haven't you said anything about it prior to now? And then obviously all the DNC puppets in the media start parroting, suit and saying, Cuomo's position, it's been untenable for a while now. He was dogged with scandals you didn't accurately report about for the past 12 months. Yeah. So you're going to see now, it's incredible to watch it happening in real time as I'm talking to you. You are going to see a lot of retconning around the reporting of Cuomo. And in particular, you're going to see a whitewashing and a burying of what CNN did, which was a huge ethical violation of not only having his brother platform his brother amidst these scandals and sort of giving him all these powder puff interviews, but also privately advising him on CNN's time about how to negotiate these sex scandals. It's ridiculous. I mean, and nothing's going to happen, by the way. Like, there's going to be no consequences.
The fact that the Biden DOJ refused to investigate Cuomo's actions with respect to the nursing homes in New York after the COVID outbreak, as I said, staying on our entire justice system, and the fact that he likely will not get prosecuted for this, and the fact that actually his own Attorney General, Letitia James, refused to charge him with anything. Resignation for him is his worst punishment. His political career is over, and they're just going to leave it at that. And that's, I mean, the sad fact is that a lot of those families who had loved ones in nursing homes who died after COVID basically wrecked all these nursing homes, killing close to 15,000 elderly in New York. Just it's a terrible injustice. And I have no hope that, or no faith in our justice system rectifying that. It's just that when you see the way things play out, usually you think, especially within the last decade, even with a lot of these, clear-cut incidents of police brutality against unarmed individuals, mainly from Black and brown communities, and the fact that a lot of police officers don't get charged, or don't get convicted, it really has caused a lot of people on both sides of the aisle to sort of become disillusioned about our justice system. Even after, all of the indiscretions and possible criminal behavior made by Hillary Clinton in 2016, the fact that the FBI and Obama DOJ did not prosecute her for anything with respect to that, and and everything that had to do with how the Trump campaign in 2016 was targeted by the intelligence community, literally having like the lowest level volunteers George Papadopoulos, Carter Page, simply speaking to people abroad and saying things that that literally like reaching the lowest bar, the lowest threshold.
Things that we've
for
got Joe
people
Biden and Obama on recordings saying as well.
Exactly. Like, it's just the things that make you look at how our intelligence community targets people. It's not for national security reasons. It's mostly for political reasons. And the fact that, like the Obama administration weaponized the FBI and CIA and the intelligence community against the Trump campaign in 2016, and then use that as sort of a pretext to then launch the Mueller probe in 2017. I mean, it really shows you how broken a lot of our institutions are. And the fact that you have a lot of, I would say, mouthpieces within corporate media saying that Trump is ruining our institutions, like it's gaslighting. It drives you insane, because these institutions are already broken, and any like effort to sort of like clean that up is seen as, Trump's Hitler, Trump's a fascist, and we need to get back to the days of old. It's truly sickening.
Yeah. Here's something I wanted to pick your brains about, and then we'll segue for the last segment of the podcast into some more upbeat and cheerier topics. But I did want to ask you about your thoughts about this, the right-left divide in media, and how people reflexively reject any reporting from a purported right-wing source, yet don't apply the same level of critical thought to a left-wing source. So again, when I was training to be a journalist, I remember we all had the balance chart, which news sources could be trusted, because obviously when you're in Britain, we don't know a lot about the lay of the land of what American news sources are, and who owns who. And so what a big part of the, education you get when you just learn about the business side of it is who owns what, which are Murdoch owned and controlled and all this stuff. And, they put, for example, CNN was considered a very sort of like middle of the roads, balanced news source that you could rely upon. And maybe it was true back then. I didn't consume a lot of CNN because, again, I lived in Britain. But it certainly isn't true now. And yet, a lot of things, people will say, oh, you can't trust that, it's on Fox. And I go, okay, good. You realize that Fox has inherent biases. And then they go and look at this news story that happened on CNN. And I go, okay, well, that story is actually provably false, because here are the facts. And they go, yeah, I trust CNN to do their fact checking over some, idiot on YouTube. And it's like, but they're not doing that. I recently recorded a podcast that hasn't aired at the time of recording this yet, where I tracked the first year of Trump in office, all the major media lies. That podcast is about 2 hours long.
Oh my God.
For 1 year. That's how many there were. And that should just tell you all you need to know. But people don't seem to do it. They go, that's a right-wing source, reject that.
Right.
But I could trust MSNBC. Joy Reid's great. It's like, what the fuck? What the fuck are you talking about? It's terrible. Like, she's one of the worst people.
100%.
So how has that occurred, and why can't people just say, hey, maybe I shouldn't trust the media at all?
Yeah, as I was saying earlier in the podcast, that there's this struggle happening right now, just in America in general, but also within media, and that is the forces of centralization versus decentralization. And I oftentimes find that it is easier to maybe not trust the source outright in terms of the publication, but to have a handful of reporters and journalists that you put your trust in. So there are a few that you can certainly trust to tell the truth. And a lot of those people, I say, are ones who, and again, no one's perfect. Everybody gets everything wrong, but there are some that are more reliable than others. And the ones who have become more reliable are oftentimes considered persona non grata within the Washington and media establishments and the elite, because they have no problem calling out their own side if they identify as part of one side than they are as calling other people out. So I mean, I look up to people like Glenn Greenwald as someone who, yeah, maybe I don't agree with everything that he says, but I think he is an honest enough reporter and an honest enough journalist to report things as they are.
Yeah.
Even if it hurts his own side, because he's clearly a liberal, clearly a progressive.
I know, right? And yet the only people that are platforming him at the moment are Fox News, which is crazy in and of itself.
It's almost like they've tried to smear him to this, like, we talked off camera that he, along with a few other people like Michael Tracy, Zay Jelani, Lee Fang, are considered like left heretics. Like they have somehow like turned their back on mainstream leftism and progressivism. Like, actually, I think it's far more honest for them and more respectable, and helps the mission as a whole when you have people who are honest enough with themselves to report things and call out people within their own camp, because I think those people truly want what's best for everyone, and they value truth ahead of everything. They're not in it for simply winning,
Yeah.
When people are only focused on winning, they'll do whatever it takes to win. And if winning is not your primary motivating factor, if truth is, you will make sure that the truth gets told. And some people may do everything. I think it's more noble to try to do anything to tell the truth. But a lot of those people don't always have the capability or the ability to tell the truth, because they're either threatened, they're silenced, they're censored, they are mocked, they cave somehow. And it really takes a strong person to try to withstand all that. So to any journalist who say, like the Glenn Greenwalds of the world, Zay Jelani's, Lee Fang's, Michael Tracy's, even Tim Pool, who, I don't agree with everything that they say, but just the fact that they are out there saying it. Even you, Richard.
I've had him on the show, and
but I'm just saying, like, the fact that you are not, regardless of what your politics are, the fact that you're willing to even just engage with people who don't agree with you, like, for a fact they won't agree with you, I say is commendable and admirable. And I think there should be more people trying to bridge that gap and not be shamed for it. And I'm hoping that is the direction that journalism eventually gets to.
Well, I hope so. One of the things that worries me about getting to that good place is, unfortunately, this like Twitch blood sports debate culture, which I've always rejected. I knew that was fucking stupid from the get-go. And people were like, "Oh, Richard, you've got above 80 IQ. You could be a big debate bro on Twitch." And I'm like, I wouldn't do it. I'd rather be dead, because all that happens is, right, you find somebody who has a really contentious opinion, very often an opinion that would stand up to no scrutiny whatsoever, and is predicated solely on the parroting of it being your side's position. It's sloganeering politics. It's what you do. And then you have somebody else come in and shout at you for 2 hours.
Yeah.
But they don't debate the topic because there's no moderator. They just unload a deluge of, and you're everything that's wrong with the left, and return to traditional values, and I'm right wing, and then the people on the left go, yeah, you're a Nazi, and they do that for 2 hours, and then they go away, and the fans of each of that side say, we won. Right. We objectively won the debate. You owned him, bro. And it's like, fucking hell. And unfortunately, the top political streamers on Twitch now, they do engage with people they fundamentally disagree with, but not to have a discussion around ideas, find consensus, maybe even present factual evidence for the benefit of their respective audiences. No, they do it for the Twitch clip gotcha. Right. When you stumble over your words or you contradict yourself, and gotcha now. And that's all they care about.
Unfortunately, the culture of cable news debate and bickering has infiltrated the world of live streaming, Twitching, and YouTube.
Oh, it's
awful. Which people are, as you said, they're in it for the gotcha clip. They're not in it for good faith debate. Like, so Jay, my co-host Majahid Kobe, I call it Jay, as you probably know, he was banned by Twitter, suspended by Twitter like 13 times. He's on his 14th account. We host the podcast. We are known as the Habbibi Bros, as you can see by my shirt.
Yep.
And we host a podcast called Habbibi Power Hour. And we initially started off by doing live streams every Wednesday night after the lockdowns hit. And we found that we had like a nice little niche following where people actually liked joining us live to simply talk about the news. Sometimes we disagree, sometimes we're in agreement, a lot of times we're in agreement. But then we started inviting people onto the show earlier this year, in which people obviously definitely didn't agree with us, but we had asked them to explain their views, to at least understand them a bit better. And sometimes we push back, but it's not designed for that, like Jay and I would be having a debate with that person. But since I'm a journalist and Jay sort of comes from like the business world, he and I can look at things from a different angle and at least be able to push back on certain things that we don't think are consistent enough.
Yeah.
And I think that people really value authenticity and building, having a level of consistency with reporting the facts and telling the truth than they do care about having that gotcha clip. And I think that really will stand the test of time. I'm hoping that people who are sort of disillusioned by politics in general, when they try to consume media, they're not everyone's looking to confirm their own bias. Like they go watch a Joy Reid on MSNBC to confirm what they already believe, or they watch a Sean Hannity on Fox News to confirm what they already believe. But they listen to something in which maybe sometimes that confirms what they believe, but a lot of times they're learning something new. And I think most people who are independent minded are at least honest enough with themselves to say, I want to learn more about our world. And I'm at a point where I'm okay if my worldview is challenged. There are a lot of people still that aren't willing to be challenged, and that's unfortunate, but that is the way of human nature, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the worry, because when I look over on Twitch and Twitch is a platform, I think it has a potential for kind of like, I don't want to say harm, that's like overblown, but what worries me is increasingly kids are getting their political information through TikTok and Twitch. It's almost like you start on TikTok as a kid and then you graduate to Twitch. And when you look at the top level, the people at the top, they're kind of full of shit, a lot of them. There are exceptions, but what they do is they turn on their stream, they sit there and they just say the words that people have come to hear: defund the police, all cops are bastards, whatever real basic rhetoric is being thrown around as the talking point of the day. They say that, and then they are showered with wealth for saying it. They are showered with money, like, hey, he said the words, and they literally throw money at you for doing it. And then where's the incentive to ever change the model?
Absolutely.
It's not there, right? This is what works. And so you end up in this insane kind of position where this like reinforcement is occurring. And of course, a lot of these people, they espouse communism and socialism, and they LARP as tankies and smash the system. They're all millionaires. I thought the best one was the fucking whatever boomer. That that fucking,
okay, boomer,
yeah, that fucking idiot, right? Whatever you say, boomer. Her, right? She is a multimillionaire, with some with a dubious history if you start looking at things she was accused of, and she's making videos of like, here's my multi-million-dollar apartment. It's like, you've really smashed the fucking system, haven't you? It's like, that's what worries me, that you're creating, you yourself don't believe what you're saying to a willing audience that maybe do believe it. And I think it's really fucking irresponsible, but it's what pays.
Absolutely. And people, there are too many grifters in the industry. within, and by the term grifter, I mean people who actually don't have principles. They're only in it for money. And that's specifically what a grifter is.
Exactly.
And they have taken over the space and really figured, like, and they're not dumb people. They're very smart, but they figured out a way to market themselves in that when they find a specific buzzword or keyword or issue du jour, they latch onto it and make sure that their whatever commentary they make on it, whatever clip they have to put out there, it's at the top trend. It's at the top of the trending page. And when I see these people, I really get infuriated because, again, I'm not an ideologue. You're not. You don't seem like an ideologue.
Not really, no.
And when it comes to some of these people, there are a lot of pseudo ideologues out there who are taking advantage of what would be a good faith argument to be made or debate to be had, and they take it and they completely manipulate it to make it look like, they are just owning the other side. And I've seen too much of it. And, the people who are sort of in the middle, the independent minded, who never really who have opinions that range across the spectrum, they're not the ones who are rewarded. So when you see the people like Nico Lull, the OK Boomer gal, or a Charlie Kirk or a Candace Owens or the Surfs, what you name it, like they all have something to latch onto. And again, this is not indicative of everyone, but it is one of those things where as soon as you say that buzzword, you're rewarded for it. So why not keep saying that buzzword to make more off of it?
Yeah, and that blurring of the line as well, because what would constitute a traditional journalist, like, again, you go back, I would say even 10 years, maybe a bit further, but the idea of, say, something like the Young Turks as a news platform would be, again, it would be risible. You wouldn't call it a news network. InfoWars, right? InfoWars poses as being news. They take all the semiology, all the trappings of what a news network looks like: man at a desk, studio lighting, serious backdrop. I'm aligned to the left with a little square here telling you what I'm talking about. But InfoWars isn't a news network. They argue themselves they're not a credible news network every time they get sued for all the fucking heinous shit and garbage they put out into the world. So you end up, kind of like in this world where, for those people, you can't even attack them on the basis of credibility, because they'll happily surrender credibility for popularity every time. They're 100%. Happy to make that trade.
And when you're not being held accountable for it or punished for it, then there's no incentive to ever have that level of integrity or consistency. And I mean, it's very evident that there will not, unless people really are fed up with the way things are going and really actually starts to hold the powerful accountable, then you might actually see some level of responsibility on part of the people leading our respective countries. But I think there's so many people, like the smartest people are the most disillusioned by it because they know things won't change. And, I think those are the ones that are initially taken out by the establishment. It's not that, some people might ask, well, where are all the patriots? Where are all the people who are, should be out there in the streets protesting this? It's because they're tired. It's because they're demoralized and dehumanized and humiliated time and time again. There's never been, they're mocked endlessly and they're not taken seriously. And those people, whether they become radicalized or not, that's obviously a discussion for something, another time, but radicalized in the sense of like, they firmly believe the stuff a little bit more. Like it just, this constant cycle of things never changing. Like, look, we could have had a huge change after Trump was elected. But the deep state runs deep. They call it a deep state for a reason because it runs deep, and they really have a firm grip on power. And when it comes to the power struggle, people will never, ever relent. They will never give an inch. And the fact that like you see so many people within the Republican Party sort of cave to a lot of the whims of the left and the neoliberal agenda, it's very hard to sort of build allies because everyone wants to get a piece of the pie. I will say this, and this is just a thought that always comes to mind. You know, the thing about Washington, D.C., I always think about a lot more will get done if nobody cared who got credit.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. You know, it's like there is this idea, isn't there, that if something, you know, we've seen people reject, you know, suggestions that, you know, for example, with Trump, especially toward, you know, ahead of the election, you know, he was having a very hard time getting some stuff put through that would have had a positive impact on people's lives because you can't have him performing well before an election.
Yeah.
Look, because we're coming up to time, I want to just sort of end on a bit of a positive note, and that's kind of talk about the emergence of, you know, I don't know what you would call them, but there are a number of people, as I say, that are like almost iconoclastic in their approach to their journalists or reporters or personalities that essentially hold up the inherent contradictions in the US media and say, like, guys, they said this in June, they're saying this in July. You've got to educate yourself to know that these guys are full of shit. And you're one of them. And, you know, there's other guys out there. We've had Neon Taster on the show. You know, we've had Michael Tracy on the show. We've had like Tim Pool even way back on the show. Although, again, I think, you know, once you start advertising prepping stuff, it makes me a bit nervous, but whatever. And we've had a number of people. Drew Holden's another great guy. I'd love to get him on the show sometime. You know, there are people out there that are essentially doing the media's job for it in terms of, you know, essentially policing it and and having a type of accountability by presenting all the times they got something wrong, rushes to judgment, contradictions, false reporting, etc. And that, to me, is at least a positive thing to come out of all of this, because I didn't see people like this 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, you know, and one of those things, and I think the reason why a lot of people have been branded as sort of right wing from that collective that you mentioned is the fact that, like, you know, a lot of the people within, say, the conservative and Republican movement, well, not Republican movement, but the conservative movement, people on the right, I look at it and, you know, they're largely consistent on things and there's a lot of them that really don't hold like a moral high ground, or they don't presume to be like morally superior than their ideological opponent, as opposed to the left, where they always claim to be on moral high ground. They claim to be morally superior, that they're always in the right. And yet there have been so many times where you can catch them on their own hypocrisy because they break their own rules. Just look at this Obama birthday bash.
Yeah.
Look at everything that's happened with COVID, the fact that they've been trying to push for mask mandates, vaccine mandates. And then you have Obama, who is a multi-millionaire former president, having hundreds of people within a tent, completely maskless. And you have, while that's all happening, you have the head of the NIAID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, commenting on a motorcycle rally in South Dakota. Like, there's no...
Well, you know, like CNN told me, Obama's for guests were a sophisticated, vaccinated crowd. So obviously it's different, right?
Obviously, right? Like, it's almost like there's a set of rules for the elites and then the set of rules for the rest of us. So when you start to see that, it's very difficult to unsee that. And there's so many people who are like, yeah, I'm never wearing a mask again. And you see how, you know, when...
Yeah, it doesn't help.
You never hear about, like, you never heard any like outrage over even Lollapalooza, You never heard any outrage. You heard very little outrage.
Makes too much money, doesn't it?
That's exactly. And it's just it really it's sad, but this stuff really radicalizes you. And I know that we were trying to end on a high note, but I will say the benefit of having a lot of these independent journalists call out the media is because they know for a fact that when people on the left try to be like some level of hall monitor, we almost know that they have skeletons in their closet and they have some level of hypocrisy. There's some rule that they're breaking. Gavin Newsom at French Laundry Restaurant, the Democrats trying to hold a dinner to welcome all the new members of Congress, even in the midst of COVID, and having to cancel that. I mean, it's just that it's literally endless. And a lot of different narratives that have taken place, like, for example, even just this whole thing with the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer, and this idea that there was a band of right-wing extremists who were looking to kidnap her. Guess what? Majority, FBI. I think it was like 12 of 13 of them were all FBI informants. It's just like the one guy, you know, I think it was that one movie. I'm trying to remember.
And that story disappeared real fucking quick, didn't it? From the news cycle, right? That was literally news for a day. Like, it's wait, crazy. What? The FBI were, talking to other FBI agents to try and trigger a member of elected government being kidnapped so they could pin it on some right-wing people they thought were a bit unsavory. Like, what the fuck is this?
I hate making this comparison, but the people on the right today are being treated like Muslims were being treated in the 2000s. You know, these entrapment schemes to try to pin crimes on them that they did not really even have the disposition to go carry out themselves, unless they were approached by an FBI agent or a member of the intelligence community. It's sad to see it. And the fact that the United States is at war with its own people, like everyone keeps talking about a civil war, we're basically already in it. It's a war of information. It may not be fire with a single shot, but we're already in that civil war.
So look, but what a note to end on. Civil war. Not what I expected, not what I had planned on my notes.
Hey, Richard, I just want to give you the unvarnished, raw, unfiltered truth that you can't get anywhere else on the internet.
No, that's true. And obviously, you can watch that in podcast format as well, can't you? I will say, your title sequence for the Habbibi Power Hour, it buckles me every time with laughter.
I'm glad I produced that all myself.
Yeah, it's like only Siraj could do this, like, because I'm still a little bit shocked by some of the stuff I see actually from you and some of the jokes you make. It's very edgy, but I do love it. It's good to see a bit of that.
Hey, if I get canceled one day for it, then Richard, I sincerely apologize for dragging you down with me.
It's all right, brother. I think listen, I spent 6-7 months at Breitbart. My card's been fucking revoked. I'm already canceled.
That's right. That would make sense.
Yeah. I think there's like a photo of the internet of me, like, as well, celebrating Trump's victory, which I wasn't doing. The headline in the background says Hillary Clinton loses election, and I'm like, yeah, I fucking hate her. You know, like,
yeah, that's the thing is, like, you know, it is almost like people cannot just be themselves anymore. Everyone has to be a robot, right? Like, you can't have any level of emotion. And like, yes, that is like the double-edged sword about Twitter. Like, people should be allowed to be themselves, but just be wary that, you know, whatever you say, again, can and will be used against you.
Oh yeah, for sure. So where can people watch the Habbibi Power Hour? This is where you get to
so we will we officially signed with Rumble. So if you go to rumble.com and type in Habbibi Power Hour or Habbibi Bros, you'll be able to find us. Of course, we do have a website that's habbibibros.us, or you could just check us out on Twitter at Habbibi_Bros.
And obviously, make sure you follow Siraj on Twitter. The list remains one of the best things about Twitter, that digital hellscape. If you want to see all of the worst opinions in one place without them having to come across your timeline organically, you follow Siraj, you can get all of the stuff there. So look, thanks so much for coming on the show. We didn't solve anything, did we? We we lamented a lot of things, but we were probably never going to solve it anyway.
You know what, Richard? You got to identify the problem before you solve it, right?
Yeah, true. And there are a lot of problems to identify. So thanks so much for being gracious with your time. I know you're a very busy guy, and looking forward, hopefully, to coming on your show sometime or getting you back whenever there's a big story. I know for now you're going to want to dig into all this Andrew Cuomo stuff. So yeah, look, there you have it, guys. That's Siraj. If you want to follow him, which I recommend you do, go and do it. If not, if you disagree with him, tweet at him, let him know. He loves that shit. So thanks so much for watching this episode of The Richard Lewis Show. We'll be back sometime soon with another guest. Who knows who? It's always a surprise. So until then, take care of yourself.